How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, February 22nd, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Khalil Mack, the elite starting defensive end for the Chicago Bears. Today, he turns 30, so that's, of course, why I'm doing this profile today. And my intention with these profiles is, of course, to let his numbers and his accolades kind of speak for themselves as to why I believe that Khalil Mack is an elite football player going into the 2021 calendar year. And if you're not familiar with Khalil Mack, he stands at about 6'3", 260 pounds. And I guess the name of his game is just that he's so dominant. He's just a very dominant defensive end. He's done a lot of things in his career that not a lot of players have done. And considering so many players have come through the NFL, come through college, and this man's an active NCAA record holder, and he's the only player in NFL history to be named a first-team All-Pro player at two different positions at the same time. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna give a little bit of background, and then I'm just gonna ease into Khalil Mack. So, with Khalil Mack, he originally came out of Florida. In high school, he tried to play basketball because, of course, he thought that playing basketball would get him a scholarship. But after tearing his patellar tendon, his football coach recruited him to be a football player all time. And then in his senior year, he would be named third-team All-State in Florida, and he would receive a scholarship from Buffalo to play football at the very last minute, which is where he would go on to establish himself as one of the greatest college football players of all time. So in 2009, he would redshirt, but his freshman year he would break in, and he would be one of the most productive freshmen in all of the MAC. So in 2010, he would go on to finish with 68 tackles in the 12 games that he played, 14 and a half tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks on the season, 2 forced fumbles. So, of course, after that, he was established as one of the best young MAC players. Didn't get any accolades his first year, but still the fact that he was able to do all that his freshman year. And he also took the number 46 following that season after he was rated a 46 on the NCAA football game. So, of course, he used that as motivation. And then the next year, he would start his career of just straight dominance in a way that kind of hasn't been seen in football ever again. So in 2011, he would play 11 games in a season where Buffalo would end up going 3-9. They didn't win a lot of games under Jeff Quinn. But, of course, in the season, Khalil Mack would finish with 20 and a half tackles for loss. He had 65 tackles on the season, 5.5 sacks, which is one more than the previous year. He finished with an interception as well. He would also force 5 fumbles on the season. So, of course, putting all of that together, he would establish himself as a first-team All-MAC player as a sophomore, and of course, he was starting to get on the radar of a lot of National Football League teams. But of course, even after being eligible, he decided that he would stay in Buffalo and continue to build his career. In 2012, which was his redshirt junior season, he would play 11 games in a season where Buffalo would end up going 4-8. But of course, in the season, Khalil Mack would finish with 94 tackles, 30 more than the previous season as a defensive end, by the way. He would finish with 21 tackles for loss, which is half a tackle more than he did the previous year. He finished with 8 sacks on the season. He finished also with 4 forced fumbles on the year as well. So, of course, he was continuing to be one of the best players. And in doing that, he was named to the first-team All-MAC for the second year in a row. And, of course, all this momentum would carry into his final season, which he would break a few records. So, in 2013, he would play 13 games in a season where Buffalo would end up going 8-5, and they actually made a bowl game. Surprisingly, of course, Khalil Mack was very instrumental in all that. In the 13 games he played, he finished with 100 tackles on the season. He finished with No, he finished with 19 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks, 3 picks. One of them was returned for a touchdown, 10 passes defended, 5 forced fumbles. He would set the NCAA record for forced fumbles in a career. He forced 16 of them in his career. And then he would tie the NCAA record for tackles for losses, in which he had 75 of them in a total of 48 games, which is insane. The fact that he was able to keep up that average for his entire collegiate career. He would leave Buffalo with the standing records for most career tackles for losses with 75, most sacks with 28.5. No one has come close, and the most forced fumbles. So in both of those and the tackles for losses and forced fumbles are now NCAA records. So after all that, he would be named first team All-MAC. He will be named MAC Defensive Player of the Year, and he was named a first team All-American from Buffalo. As a player from the MAC to be named a first team All-American, of course, it shows how dominant he was, of course, at that very moment. And after his 4 years at Buffalo, after redshirting, he has established himself as a good enough prospect to be taken with the 5th overall pick in the 2014 NFL draft to the then Oakland Raiders, because they were in Oakland at the time. And starting from there, that's where he would start to shine and show the world what he was capable of. So in 2014, in his age 23 season, he would start all 16 of the games that he would play in a season where the Raiders went 3-13 under Dennis Allen and Tony Sparano, because that was in between their coaches, or in between their coaching tenures. On the season, Khalil Mack would finish with a combined 76 tackles from the defensive end of outside linebacker position. He'd forced a fumble. He finished with 4 sacks on the season, as well as he had 16 total tackles for loss. And even though the Raiders didn't make the playoffs, Khalil Mack would make the all-rookie team. And this would be the last time in his career, the last year in his career, he didn't make the Pro Bowl. So just like this was his career up until he was a Pro Bowler. Before then, he was the greatest defensive player to ever come out of the MAC, an NCAA record holder, and a top 5 draft pick who in his first year didn't get caught up in all the hype, continued to do what he needed to do, and he was able to put up a good amount of production for the Raiders, and he was one of the best. He at least made the all-rookie team, showing that he was the best rookie player at his position. So continuing into his Pro Bowl career, in just his second year in the NFL, he would start all 16 games in a season where the Oakland Raiders would go 7-9, a 4-win difference from the previous year. This is the first season under Jack Del Rio. In this season, Khalil Mack would finish with 77 total tackles, as like just one more than the previous year. But a lot of his tackles would come from behind the line. He had 23 tackles for loss on the season. He had 15 total sacks, and he forced 2 fumbles as well. Just incredible, dominant season. And then in 2015, he became the first player in NFL history. In his second year in the league, he became the first player in NFL history to be selected as a first-team All-Pro at 2 different positions, at outside linebacker and defensive end. As in, instead of giving it to 2 different players who probably deserved to be nominated, he was recognized for both positions. That has never, ever been done in NFL history, and this was his first Pro Bowl season. And even though the Raiders wouldn't make the playoffs, Khalil Mack, the NFL world was aware of who Khalil Mack was, and I think even that was just the first nail in his Hall of Fame coffin. Continuing on, in his next season, in his age 25 season, he would start all 16 games yet again in a season where the Raiders would end up going 12-4 with the second best record in the AFC West. In the season, Khalil Mack would finish with 73 combined tackles, a little less than the year before. He finished with 11 sacks. He would finish with 1 interception, which was a pick 6. He forced 5 fumbles on the season. He recovered 3 of them, and he recovered 1 of them for a touchdown. He recovered them for a yard. I'm sorry, he didn't have a touchdown, but he still had the pick 6. He had 5 forced fumbles, 3 recovered fumbles with 11 sacks. And in the season, he would be named a Pro Bowler for the second year in a row. He would be named a first-team All-Pro for the second year in a row. And he would be named the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in his third year in the league and his second Pro Bowl season, just to show you how dominant Khalil Mack was, of course, at that time and still currently is. This was his second year as a Pro Bowler. He was the Defensive Player of the Year. And, of course, with this momentum, they would go into the playoffs where they would lose to the Texans in the first round. This is the last time that the Raiders have been in the playoffs. This would lead into his 2017 season, his last season with Oakland, in his fourth season in the league. He would start all 16 games in a season where the Raiders would go 6-10 and miss the playoffs. But in this season, Khalil Mack would end up with 78 combined tackles, which is the most tackles that he'd have for an entire season, just by one over, because he was about average. He was roughly keeping it about. That was roughly like what he was doing every season up until then. He was also able to force a fumble, and he was also able to recover a fumble. He finished with 10.5 sacks as well, and he would be named a Pro Bowler for the third year in a row. He would miss the first team All-Pro for the first time in his career ever since he had started, in his Pro Bowl career. But in his final year, he had established that, or I guess the Raiders decided that it would be a good idea to trade him, and I think this was right before they got John Gruden. So just to give you a little bit of background into that, I think John Gruden wanted draft picks, and they got one or two really, really good draft picks from the Bears, but nonetheless he would go. And even just looking back at his college career, or in his Oakland Raiders career, he started every single game that he could, 64 for 64. In those seasons, he finished with 40.5 sacks on the season. He finished with 9 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, and he was in the least amount of combined tackles he'd have in a season was 73. Just to give you a glimpse as to what this man was doing for his tenure in Oakland. But nonetheless, after that, for the 2018 season, he would get a start with the Chicago Bears. And in 2018, he would start 13 games and play in 14 in a season where the Chicago Bears would finish 12-4 with the best record in the AFC North under Matt Nagy when he won the Coach of the Year. And this, I believe, was, if not Mitch Trubisky's rookie year, his second year in the league. And then, of course, within this season, Khalil Mack was, of course, one of the driving forces to help the Chicago Bears make the playoffs. In this season, he would finish with 47 combined tackles, which is the least amount that he'd have by even like 30. 10 tackles for loss. He had 12.5 sacks on the season, which is the second most amount of sacks that he would have in a season. He finished with an interception, a pick six, his second pick six of his career. He hasn't had a pick since. He finished with 6 forced fumbles, which was the most forced fumbles he's ever had in a season. He also recovered 2 of them. And after leading the Chicago Bears into the playoffs, they would lose in the first game to the Philadelphia Eagles. And in this season, Khalil Mack will be named a Pro Bowler for the 4th year in a row. He was named to the first team All NFL for the 3rd time in a 4-year stretch. And, I mean, he was still continuing to show the rest of the NFL why he was one of the most dominant linebackers / defensive ends that the game has ever seen. This would transition into his age 28 season in 2019, where he would start all 16 games in a season where the Chicago Bears would finish 8-8 with the 3rd best record in the NFC North in Matt Nagy's 3rd season. In this season, Khalil Mack would finish with 47 combined tackles, as many as the year before. He had 8 tackles for loss. He would finish with 8.5 sacks on the season, as he would force 5 fumbles and recover 1 of them. And after this season, he would be named to the Pro Bowl for his 5th year in a row, even though the Chicago Bears completely missed the playoffs. And then this would lead, last but not least, into his most current season. So for 2020, in his 3rd season with the Chicago Bears, Khalil Mack would start all 16 games in a season where the Bears would finish 8-8. Same record as the year before, but this time they would actually make the playoffs with the expanded playoff bracket. And then they would lose in the first round to the New Orleans Saints. And this was the game that was on Nickelodeon. So, even in this season, Khalil Mack would put up 50 combined tackles, the most that he's put up since he's gotten to Chicago. 11 tackles for loss. He finished with 9 sacks on the season. He would finish with an interception. It wasn't exactly a pick, but he also had 3 forced fumbles and 2 fumble recoveries. And with all those alongside the 9 sacks, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the 6th year in a row. So just with all of that leading up until now, Khalil Mack is just now entering his 30s, and with the current momentum he's carrying, he's made the Pro Bowl the last 6 seasons. So of course, I think that career speaks for itself. And considering this is a player who is an NCAA record holder in 2 different statistical categories, who was a top 5 pick out of the University of Buffalo. This is also a guy who was named to the Pro Bowl 6 years in a row, the NFL All-Pro first team 4 times, because of course he was named to the NFL first team All-Pro this season too. The fact that he was able to do it 4 times in a 6-year stretch, and he was able to, this means that he was recognized as the best player in the entire NFL at his position 4 times, and even within that, he would be named to the All-Decades team from the NFL, and I mean he's continuing to build an all-time great career, and it'll be a matter of time before this dude's wearing a gold jacket. But in the meantime, I think it'll be very fun to watch Khalil Mack for these upcoming seasons and for the 2021 calendar year as we wait until September for the next football season to start. I think Khalil Mack is most definitely an elite player to keep your eye on. And with that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to my piece. Once again, today is Monday, February 22nd, 2021, out here in this quarantine. Today is Khalil Mack's 30th birthday. And with that said, if you ever get a chance, watch Khalil Mack. He's wearing number 52 for the Chicago Bears. And just don't blink, because you might watch him run through split set double teams to sack your favorite quarterback. With that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and I will catch you tomorrow on Tuesday, February 23rd, where of course I'm gonna run through the elite episodes of the day, or I'm just gonna run through the elite performances of the day. And I will do my individual profiles on D'Angelo Russell, the elite starting point guard for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and Jamal Murray, the elite starting point guard for the Denver Nuggets, as they do both have birthdays on the same day. Thanks once again for listening to my piece, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.